A watch disappeared on the 14th of April 2026. No press release. No farewell. Rolex just quietly replaced the product page. The watch that sold at 3 times retail for 8 straight years. The one with the blue and red bezel. The one that turned watch collecting into a spectator sport for people who had never worn a watch in their lives. Gone. And then, nothing came to replace it. That silence tells you almost everything you need to know about how Rolex manages its catalog in 2026. Not with announcements. With absences. Today, we're going through every major Rolex line, what they actually are, what they pretend to be, and what the 2026 releases reveal about where the whole thing is headed. Some of these watches are brilliant. Some are birthday stickers on perfectly ordinary watches. All of them are more complicated than they appear. Let's start where Rolex wants you to start. The Oyster Perpetual 100 years. The most honest watch Rolex makes is also the one collectors ignore. No date, no extra complications, just time, wrapped in the case that started everything. In 1926, Hans Wilsdorf patented the Oyster case, the world's first commercially viable, waterproof wristwatch. That's not marketing. A swimmer named Mercedes Gleitze wore one through a 10-hour English Channel, crossing the following year, and the watch survived without a problem. The Oyster case changed what a wristwatch could survive, and therefore what it could mean. Before it, a watch was fragile. After it, a watch was armor. 100 years later, Rolex's big centenary celebration is a slate-dialed Oyster Perpetual 41, with 100 years printed at the 6 o'clock position where Swiss-made normally sits. That's it. That's the birthday party. The watch itself is Rolex, a combination of steel and yellow gold that hasn't appeared on the Oyster Perpetual in the modern era. There's a gold bezel, a gold crown engraved with 100, green accents on the minute track, and a slate sunray dial that genuinely looks good. 3 sizes, 31, 36, 41 millimeters. $8,950 for the largest. Here's what that around $8,950 buys you. A caliber 3230 inside a slightly upgraded 2-tone case. The movement is the same one in the standard steel OP. The case dimensions are identical. The bracelet is unchanged. What you are paying a meaningful premium for is 2 words and a different bezel color. Reactions online were exactly what you'd expect. The top comment on the announcement thread, sitting at 4,000 upvotes. It's a sticker special with a gold ring. That's not entirely fair. The Rolex treatment genuinely doesn't exist anywhere else in the current OP lineup, and the anniversary marking is restrained in a way that Rolex almost never manages. They didn't slap a massive 100 across the dial. The watch is wearable. But if you strip away the context, if you hand it to someone who doesn't know what year it is, they have a pleasant 2-tone watch. The story is doing most of the work. The deeper OP story in 2026 is actually about the smaller sizes. 16 solid gold variants, 28 and 34 millimeter cases, with dials featuring natural stone hour markers at 3, 6, and 9 heliotrope, Dumortier right, materials that have never appeared on a Rolex before, starting at $30,000 for the 28 millimeter. These aren't the anniversary piece. These are Rolex quietly expanding its language for what an entry-level collection can look like when entry-level is relative. And there's a multicolored Jubilee motif dial on the 36mm steel OP. Letters spelling Rolex in rotating colors that is either the most fun Rolex has had in a decade or a visual argument for restraint, depending on your threshold. The OP is Rolex in its simplest form. What comes next is Rolex, when it gets complicated in every sense. The Datejust, the ombre question. The Datejust has existed in one form or another since 1945. It has been on the wrist of presidents, dictators, tennis champions, and every middle manager who ever negotiated a lease. It's so embedded in the visual language of success that people stopped seeing it decades ago. It became furniture. That's not an insult. Furniture that costs $11,650 and holds its value is a specific and useful thing. The Datejust 41 inches steel has been one of the most reliable secondary market performers in the moderate luxury tier for years, because it's boring in exactly the right way. Boring here means nobody chases it, so nobody inflates it, so the price is approximately what it should be. The 2026 edition is a green ombre dial, the first ombre treatment on the Datejust line. Green lacquer as the base, then black lacquer sprayed in concentric circles toward the edges, creating a gradient from deep forest to near black at the rim, paired with a white Rolex case and a white gold fluted bezel. $11,650 at retail. It's a better watch than the Centenary OP. The dial treatment is genuinely new, genuinely complex to execute. Rolex applies each layer individually, and the color transition is smoother than most competitors manage with similar techniques. The white Rolex case reads as clean rather than ostentatious, and it sits in the standard catalog with relatively broad allocations, meaning you might actually be able to buy one. The catch is the purchase structure, and forums have been arguing about this for 3 years. The smooth bezel Datejust, without the Jubilee bracelet, loses around 15% of its value the moment you leave the authorized dealer. The formula that holds value is specific: fluted bezel, Jubilee bracelet. Deviate and the secondary market penalizes you. The ombre model comes on a Jubilee, so it passes that test. But if you fell in love with the dial and wanted it on a different bracelet configuration, you'd be working against the math. The Datejust is the honest middle of the catalog. The watch that comes next hasn't been honest about what it is for a long time. The Submariner, the myth that ate itself. Walk into any watch conversation in 2026, and someone will say, the Submariner is the greatest tool watch ever made. Walk into any dive shop and ask if anyone wears one in the water, and you'll hear laughter. The Sub's design is still flawless. 39mm until 2020, then 41, a change that caused more forum rage than most geopolitical events. 300-meter water resistance. The Cerachrom bezel doesn't fade, doesn't scratch in ordinary use, and still reads perfectly after 10 years of daily wear. Caliber 3000, 235 inside. The bracelet glide lock clasp is one of the best in the industry. On pure engineering terms, the Sub earns every word of praise it gets. What it doesn't earn is its cultural position, and the catalog hasn't had a new Submariner for 2026. Submariner, Sea Dweller, and Deep Sea all sat out this cycle. Rolex rarely loads a heavy sports year and a heavy dress year simultaneously. And 2026 is the anniversary year, so the Oyster Perpetual family gets the attention. The green-dialed Starbucks Submariner is still the most requested steel sports watch at most authorized dealers outside the Pepsi. And with the Pepsi now gone, it may be the single most requested watch in the entire lineup. Secondary market prices for unworn examples sit comfortably above retail, and have since the day it launched. The bracelet gap issue mentioned in enthusiast circles is real at 41mm. The Sub wears bulkier than its predecessor on smaller wrists. The lug-to-lug measurement expanded proportionally. Some collectors with 6-inch wrists who loved the 39mm find the current version pushes against the edge of comfortable. This is not a flaw in the traditional sense, but it's the kind of thing that disappears in sales conversations and shows up in forum threads at midnight. At least 3 people on Watch You Seek have documented selling their 2020 Submariner and replacing it with a vintage 39mm reference, specifically because of this. That's not an epidemic, but it's a signal. Drop your current sub-reference below and tell me if you'd go back to 39 if you could. The Submariner is a watch built for the ocean that nobody takes to the ocean. The next model was built for the sky. Same story. The GMT Master 2, and the silence where the Pepsi used to be. The original GMT Master was Pan American Airways' idea. In 1954, they came to Rolex with a specific problem. Their pilots were flying transatlantic routes and needed to track 2 time zones simultaneously. Rolex designed a watch with a second hour hand and a 24-hour bezel, half red for day and half blue for night. Function, utility, a tool for a specific job. 70 years later, the pilots who needed that watch have GPS, digital cockpit displays, and phone-synced atomic clocks. The GMT Master 2 is now worn primarily by men in financial services who travel for meetings. That's not a criticism. It's an observation about how tools become symbols when their function is no longer the point. The 2026 GMT Master 2 lineup is the Batman, the Batgirl, the Sprite, and the Bruce Wayne. That's the entire steel offering. No red, no blue and red. The colorway that defined the collection since 1955, absent. The Pepsi's disappearance was confirmed through absence, which is classic Rolex. The product page went dead on the 13th of April 2026. The configurator updated to 3 options. No statement, no explanation, nothing. Dealers had been quietly told in February that no further deliveries were coming. By the time Geneva opened, the secondary market had already moved. Pre-owned examples that retailed around $11,800 were listing at $30,000 and climbing. Unworn examples approaching $40,000. Here's what makes the Pepsi story more interesting than a standard discontinuation. The manufacturing challenge was always real. Red is the hardest color in Cerachrome. The sintering process required to fuse 2 distinctly colored ceramics without the colors bleeding is genuinely volatile. Rolex went 11 years without a steel Pepsi, from 2007 to 2018, specifically because they couldn't produce the red-blue bezel in ceramic at scale. That's not a rumor. It's documented in the production history. In 2022, Rolex filed U.S. patent 12,428,335b2. It describes, with unusual precision, a manufacturing process for producing a stable red and black ceramic bezel insert. The watch community read it as a roadmap to a ceramic Coke GMT. The original Coke bezel has never been made in Cerachrome. The patent exists. The bezel hasn't appeared. Rolex pulled the Pepsi and released nothing in its place. Every major watch publication had called a ceramic Coke as the replacement. The consensus was close to unanimous. Rolex did the opposite of what was expected and said nothing about it. That unpredictability isn't accidental. The moment a brand becomes entirely predictable, the mystique that sustains demand begins to erode. What happened at Watches and Wonders 2026 with the GMT is, in its way, a lesson in how to maintain cultural position through strategic silence. Somewhere tonight, someone who bought the Pepsi in 2018 at retail is doing mental math on whether to sell. They paid $11,800. The current listing price is $32,000. What they can't calculate is what the watch means to them beyond the number, and whether selling it would confirm or end something. The Pepsi's death is interesting. What happens to the Daytona is the conversation nobody saw coming. The Cosmograph Daytona, the surprise off the list. For the better part of a decade, the Daytona in steel has been the hardest watch in the world to buy at retail. Waitlists at authorized dealers routinely stretched to 5 or 6 years. Some dealers stopped taking names. A watch retailing around $16,000 traded on the secondary market for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, depending on configuration. The demand was so outsized and so consistent that Rolex didn't need to change anything. The watch sold itself by being unavailable. The 2026 Daytona news is categorically different from everything else in this year's release. Rolex introduced a Releasium Daytona, steel case body, platinum bezel ring, white Grand Feuille enamel dial, anthracite Cerachrome insert with horizontally oriented tachymeter numerals that echo original 60s references, and a sapphire exhibition caseback, the first on a steel Daytona ever, revealing the caliber 4,131 inside. It's an off-catalog piece, meaning it doesn't sit in the standard reference list. Availability runs through select boutiques. Production is low. The enamel dial is the detail that matters. Grand Feuille enamel is a lost art technique. The dial is fired at extremely high temperatures, which burns off the carrier material and leaves the enamel fused directly to the metal base. The rejection rate is substantial even for the best manufacturers. Pieces crack or develop surface blemishes in the kiln, and those are simply discarded. For a brand built on industrialized precision and consistent volume, choosing Grand Feuille enamel for any piece signals something deliberate. Rolex is saying, we have the patience for this. The legibility criticism about the Daytona is worth naming because it's accurate. Subdials at 40 millimeters on a chronograph read small. At 100 miles per hour in a race car, the registers are genuinely difficult to read quickly. The watch has been a jewelry piece for at least 20 years. The Rolesium version, with its white enamel dial and platinum accents, removes any remaining ambiguity about what it is. It's a display object, a very beautiful one, but describing it as a racing tool would require the same dishonesty as calling the Submariner a diver's companion. At the price this off-catalog piece will command, you're buying craft, provenance, and a conversation piece. Those are real things. They're just not the same thing as a chronograph for professional racing. The Daytona is Rolex's most aspirational piece. The next watch is its most personal. The Day-Date New Gold, Old Power. There is a specific type of photograph that appears in history books. A world leader shaking someone else's hand or signing something important, and on their left wrist, a yellow gold bracelet watch, the day and date displayed at the top of the dial, a fluted bezel. The Day-Date has been in that photograph more than any other watch ever made. Lyndon Johnson wore one. Fidel Castro wore one. That's the range. For 2026, it turns 60. 2 anniversaries at once. The brand's Oyster Centenary and the Day-Date's own birthday. Rolex responded with something it hadn't done in approximately 20 years. A new gold alloy. Jubilee Gold. 18 karat, entirely developed and produced in-house. The description from Rolex: tender yellow, warm gray, and soft pink that shift as the light changes. What that actually means in practice is an alloy that reads warmer than white gold, subtler than traditional yellow gold, and softer than Everose. It sits in its own register. The debut piece is an off-catalog Day-Date 40, reference 228235, paired with a pale green aventurine dial and baguette-cut diamond indices. The aventurine is natural stone, not the glass-based imitation common in the market. The stone has gray inclusions running through the pale green, which make it visually complex at any angle. But the flaw is that the aventurine dials, because they're actual stone, are fragile in a way that lacquer or enamel dials are not. A hard impact can crack the material. This isn't theoretical, it's documented in servicing reports from existing stone dial Day-Dates. For a watch intended to communicate stability and permanence, there's something quietly ironic about a case holding something that can spiderweb from a sharp knock against a doorframe. The price for this piece hasn't been officially stated. Comparable off-catalog Day-Dates in precious metal configurations with stone dials have run between $58,000 and $100,000, depending on gem setting. The standard Day-Date collection in more conventional metals continues unchanged. Those start around $40,000 and carry the presidential bracelet that still reads, in 2026, as the clearest single signal of arrived status in wristwatches. No other bracelet means the same thing. There are more technically impressive watches. There are none more universally understood. The Day-Date is finished business. It means what it means. The Yachtmaster 2 is unfinished business. And unfinished is interesting. The Yachtmaster 2, the comeback nobody expected. In 2024, Rolex quietly discontinued one of its most mechanically complex watches. The Yachtmaster 2 vanished from the catalog after 17 years. The reason was never stated. The community assumed it was the substantial 44mm size, the aesthetics, and the ownership pattern. 2 years later, it's back. The new generation brings a completely redesigned case, a cleaner dial with rounded hour markers that pull it closer to classic Rolex aesthetics, and a new caliber, 4162. The movement has been fundamentally rebuilt. The programmable countdown mechanism remains, but the implementation is different. Rolex says the new bezel operation is more intuitive. Retail on the steel version, $20,300. The comeback raises an honest question. Who is this for? The original failed commercially enough to be discontinued. The problem wasn't the engineering. The engineering was extraordinary. The problem was that the watch demanded context. If you don't race sailing regattas, the countdown function is a curiosity, not a tool. And if you do race regattas, you probably use an electronic timer anyway. But here's the thing about the return. $20,300 $300 for steel buys, significant movement complexity, and a genuinely distinctive complication. The Patek Philippe Aquanaut chronograph starts at around $60,000. The AP Royal Oak offshore chronograph at retail is $45,000 and climbing. On pure complication per dollar terms, at this price point, the Yachtmaster 2 is hard to argue with. Whether the market accepts it this time around will depend on whether Rolex has genuinely resolved the usability problem. If the new bezel actually teaches itself, the watch has a chance. If owners are still posting confused forum threads in 2027, the discontinuation will happen again. The initial reaction from Watches and Wonders was warmer than expected. The case redesign alone resolved several of the aesthetic objections from the first generation. The bulk is real, but the proportions are better than before. Some reviewers called it the sleeper of the show. The Yachtmaster 2 came back. One of the professional tool watches never really left. It just stopped being about the tool. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part, the Submariner, Sea Dweller, and the Professional tier. No new references in 2026 for the Submariner, Sea Dweller, Deep Sea, Explorer, Explorer 2, Air King, or Sky Dweller. Rolex rarely refreshes a collection in the same year it introduces another line, and the centenary focus meant material storytelling took priority over sports watch expansion. This is worth saying plainly because there's a tendency in watch media to treat a year with no new sports watch references as a kind of fallow period. It's not. Each of these collections is currently producing some of the most consistent secondary market performance in the industry, without new references, because the existing references are that good. The Explorer 1 is the quiet argument for the entire catalog. The dial is 3 hands, no date, black with white Mercedes hands, and chromolite luminescence. Nothing else. At $6,750, it's the purest expression of what Rolex is before status got involved. The community nickname for people who buy it is, "If you know, you know," meaning it doesn't announce itself, and people who understand watches recognize it anyway. The Air King sits at the other end of legibility arguments. The dial mixes Arabic numerals at 3, 6, and 9 with a minute scale in a visual arrangement that enthusiasts have debated since 2016. You either find it distinctive or you find it busy. The green Rolex logo at 12 is the only moment of color in an otherwise functional instrument aesthetic. No new references in 2026 means the debate continues without resolution. The Air King is Rolex's most polarizing watch by a wide margin, more than the Daytona, which has consensus around it, more than the Sky Dweller, which has indifference. People either defend the dial or they don't understand it. That gap, for a watch this simple, is unusual. The Sky Dweller is the most mechanically complex watch in the catalog. It has an annual calendar plus dual time zones, with the ring command bezel allowing all functions to be set without pulling the crown. It remains the piece that makes you wonder why it doesn't get more attention. At approximately $16,750 in steel, it's Rolex's most underrated daily wear for people who actually travel. The thickness is real. It won't slide easily under a dress shirt cuff. But on a wrist with space to breathe, the dial complexity reads differently than the Daytonas. Less racing heritage, more quiet authority. The professional tier doesn't need 2026 to justify itself. But what happened to one very specific professional watch needs explaining. The Cookie Monster. What disappears when a reference dies? In the same week the Pepsi died, Rolex also discontinued the white gold Submariner date, reference 126619LB. Known universally as the Cookie Monster, for its white gold case paired with a black dial and a blue serichrome bezel. The color combination of blue and black. The visual pattern that gave it the name. The Cookie Monster was introduced in 2020 as the replacement for the Smurf. It lasted 6 years. The discontinuation leaves the Submariner lineup without a white gold representative featuring a contrasting dial and bezel. That's not a small absence. White gold professional sports references trade at the highest premiums within their respective collections. The Pepsi was the most desired steel GMT. The Cookie Monster was its white gold equivalent in the Submariner line. Removing both in the same catalog update is either deliberate scarcity architecture or a coincidence that the secondary market will price regardless. The Cookie Monster pre-owned was trading around $38,000 to $42,000 before the discontinuation. After, that floor moved. A woman bought one in early 2024 as a gift to herself after a promotion. Paid $34,000 on the secondary market because the AD waitlist was closed. 3 months later, the reference was gone. She told a Watch Crunch thread, "I feel like I accidentally did something smart." She hadn't accidentally done anything. The market is structured to make certain watches feel like accidents when they're actually the inevitable result of controlled scarcity. The watch remains extraordinary. The blue and black serichrome is still one of the most visually compelling dial and bezel combinations in the collection. What changed is only that no new ones are being made, and that fact, by itself, changes the meaning of every one that exists. Have you ever owned a reference that got discontinued after you bought it? What happened to your thinking about the watch? When Rolex discontinues something, it's always a decision. The question is, what it's a decision about. The 1908, the watch Rolex is almost embarrassed by. Hans Wilsdorf registered the name Rolex in 1908. 18 years before the Oyster case, 2 years before he moved the company from London to Geneva. The 1908 reference, introduced as the successor to the Cellini, takes that founding year as its name. It's the only current Rolex with a transparent caseback. That detail deserves a pause. Rolex's core brand identity is built on opacity, physical and metaphorical. The Oyster case is sealed. Movements are hidden. The brand does not traditionally invite you to look at how the watch is made. Patek Philippe and Vacheron Constantin show their movements because movement finishing is part of their competitive argument. Rolex, historically, has not needed to make that argument. The transparent case back on the 1908 is Rolex, acknowledging that in the 5-figure dress watch tier, it now competes with manufacturers who finish their movements differently. The caliber 7,140 inside is manually wound, a departure from Rolex's self-winding norm, and the movement architecture is genuinely different from anything else in the catalog. The finishing is better than it has any right to be for a brand not known for movement display. The 2026 lineup for the 1908 includes a platinum iteration with an ice blue dial and a rice grain texture that appears delicate against the metal. No new references announced at Watches and Wonders, which means the 1908 continues as a statement about aspiration rather than volume. It's not the watch Rolex sells the most of. It's the watch Rolex shows when someone asks whether the brand can compete on pure watchmaking terms. The answer, looking at the 1908, is almost. The 1908 is Rolex reaching for something. What it's reaching toward is the same thing the entire 2026 catalog is really about. What 2026 actually means. Strip the anniversary marketing away. Ignore the slate dials and the 100 years engravings. What actually happened at Watches and Wonders 2026 is this. Rolex removed its most iconic reference without replacing it. Introduced its first new gold alloy in 2 decades, brought back a watch that failed, rebuilt from the ground up, and launched a material storytelling year that prioritized craft demonstrations over complications or new collections. That's not a brand running on momentum. That's a brand making arguments. The argument the enamel Daytona makes. We have the patience for lost art techniques. The argument the Jubilee Gold Day Date makes is that Rolex can still invent materials, not just watches. The argument the Yachtmaster 2's return makes is that Rolex feels they were right the first time, and now are feeling even more right. The argument the Centenary OP makes is this: the oyster case is the product, everything else is variation. And the Pepsi's disappearance makes the most specific argument of all. Rolex pulled the watch that defined a generation of collector behavior. The weighting, the premiums, the secondary market theater, the whole architecture of desire around a steel sports watch at retail. Whether the ceramic Coke bezel arrives next year, or in 2031 or never, the removal of the red from the steel catalog is Rolex closing one chapter without telling anyone what the next one is called. The watch is on the wrist of someone who bought it in 2018 for $11,800. It hasn't changed. What it means, and what it costs, and whether owning it connects them to something or just to a number, that calculation runs differently now than it did the week before April 14th. That shift is not about a watch. It's about how objects carry meaning when scarcity is the point. So what does this tell you about Rolex? Let us know in the comments. Like this video and subscribe to this channel for more. If you've been figuring out where you actually stand in the Rolex catalog, the buying guide in the pinned comment is the framework I wish I'd had when I started. Not a list of watches. A way of thinking about why you want what you want. That turns out to matter more.